The Boy Who Never Came Home. A narrative retelling of the Etan Patz case and the third trial of Pedro Hernandez. Hey dear truth seekers, welcome to Behind the Crime, where true crime meets real life. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Let's uncover the truth, one case at a time. Now let's see today's story. There are some faces that become more than faces. They become symbols, silent testimonies of unanswered questions. Etan Patz's face was one of them. A wide, earnest smile. Sandy blonde hair. Eyes that shone with the open wonder only a child carries. A blue backpack slung over a too small shoulder. On the morning of May 25, 1979, 6-year-old Etan stepped off the front stoop of his Soho home for his first walk alone to the school bus stop, just 2 blocks away. He never made it. That moment, that single walk, that vanished boy, carved itself into the American consciousness and remained lodged there, etched into posters, news segments, and worried conversations about child safety for generations. For decades, the question lingered. There were leads, false confessions, suspects, doubts, and heartbreak. There were years of nothingness. A whole country watched as the mystery stretched into a cold, echoing void. And then, much later, more than 3 decades after that spring morning, one man whispered the words that would set the wheels of justice in motion. I did it. I choked him. That man was Pedro Hernandez. But the story was never simple, and now, all these years later, it's being rewritten again. The day Etan vanished began like any other, unremarkable, gentle, and full of little plans. His mother, Julie, was helping her other children get ready. Etan, excited and proud, insisted that he was finally old enough to walk to the bus stop alone. He'd asked before. His parents had hesitated before. But in the rhythm of a safe neighborhood, in the familiar comfort of their block, that morning felt right. He wore a striped shirt, carried $1 to buy a soda, and walked out the door with the buoyant confidence of a boy who believed the world was good. Julie watched him go. It was the last time she saw him. Within hours, concern turned into panic. Within days, panic turned into a national search. Etan's disappearance helped change the country. Milk cartons began printing missing children's faces, and May 25th was eventually recognized as National Missing Children's Day. But back in 1979, the case stalled early. There were no witnesses, no body, no physical evidence. New York City's sprawling streets held too many shadows. And the boy remained missing. Police chased countless leads. They interviewed neighbors, drifters, local shop owners. Years passed. A man named Jose Ramos, linked to Etan's babysitter, became a strong suspect. Yet nothing stuck. No charges. No closure. Etan's parents, Stan and Julie Patz, held on. They became relentless advocates for missing children. While time forged new years around them, the wound never faded. Etan became the child America lost, and never truly stopped searching for. No one knew that in another state hundreds of miles away, a teenage boy working in a convenience store in Soho might have held the secret all along. That boy was Pedro Hernandez. It was 2012 to 33 years after the disappearance, when a New Jersey investigator working on another missing child case received an unexpected tip. A relative of Pedro Hernandez told him that Hernandez had confessed many years ago to harming a boy in New York. The investigator was skeptical. After so many years, countless false confessions had surfaced, but he followed up. Hernandez, then in his early 50s, was brought in for questioning. Soft-spoken, slight frame, eyes downcast, diagnosed with personality disorders, a history of hallucinations and difficulty distinguishing reality from fantasy. A man people described as vulnerable, suggestible, eager to please. And yet he told police this. When I was 18, I lured a boy into the basement of the shop. I choked him. He described putting the boy's lifeless body into a bag and leaving it in the trash. No body. No physical evidence. Just a confession. The police brought him back the next day. Then the next. Hernandez wavered, shifted details, seemed confused at times. But the central message remained. He said he'd killed a boy, Etan. For detectives desperate for an answer, it was enough to reopen the case. For the prosecutors, it was enough to charge him. But for many observers, and for Hernandez's defense, it wasn't enough. Not nearly. The first trial began in 2015. It was one of the most anticipated trials of the decade. The courtroom felt like a time capsule cracked open. The Patzes sat through testimony that forced them to relive the nightmare. Prosecutors argued Hernandez's confession was genuine and chilling. They said he had access. He worked in the bodega on Etan's route. He had opportunity. He had motive, if only in the twisted impulses of a troubled mind. The defense pushed back hard. They argued. Hernandez was mentally ill. He had hallucinations. He was extraordinarily suggestible. He had been questioned for hours, maybe too long. There was no physical evidence. No witnesses. No forensics. Nothing but words. Meanwhile, another suspect, Jose Ramos, still loomed in the background as a plausible perpetrator. The jury deliberated for 18 days. 18 days of debate, tension, argument, and unraveling. And then, deadlock. One juror refused to convict. A mistrial was declared. Public opinion split sharply. Some believed Hernandez was guilty. Others believed he had been coerced or was delusional. The truth remained elusive. The prosecution chose to try Hernandez again. In 2017, a second trial unfolded, rehashing the same questions with sharper focus. This time, prosecutors presented additional testimony from people who claimed Hernandez had spoken of harming a child decades earlier. They argued those comments predated any police questioning, proof that the confession wasn't fabricated. The jury took 9 days. This time they reached a verdict. Guilty. Pedro Hernandez was convicted of kidnapping and murdering Etan Patz. After 38 years, the Patz family finally had an answer, at least in the eyes of the law. Hernandez was sentenced to 25 years to life. There was no celebration. Only the quiet, heavy exhale of a family who had lived too long in sorrow. For many Americans, the case was finally closed. But justice, like memory, can be fragile. In 2024, Hernandez's legal team launched a renewed challenge. They argued. His confession was unreliable due to his mental health condition. The interrogation methods were flawed and potentially coercive. Evidence had come to light suggesting missteps in the investigative process. New assessments of his cognitive limitations raised questions about whether he fully understood his statements or their implications. Appeals courts reviewed the case carefully. The debate was no longer just about Hernandez, it was about the justice system itself. The reliability of confessions. The treatment of mentally vulnerable suspects. The weight of a high-profile case. In mid-2024, a New York appeals court made a stunning decision. It overturned Hernandez's conviction and ordered a new trial. More than 45 years after Etan's disappearance, the case returned once again to uncertainty. In November 2025, prosecutors announced that Hernandez would face a third trial. This was extraordinary. Rare. Almost unbelievable. Why would the state pursue this again after so long? Because Etan's story still mattered. Because a child vanished. Because the country had never forgotten. Because the Patz family deserved an answer, and because prosecutors still believed Hernandez was responsible. But the third trial promises to be the most complicated yet. The defense will undoubtedly argue. Hernandez's confession was the product of a vulnerable mind under pressure. There is no corroborating evidence. The case against him remains circumstantial and psychological, not forensic. The reasonable doubt is overwhelming. The prosecutors will counter. Hernandez repeatedly admitted guilt. His confession contained details no one else had. His earlier statements to relatives predated police involvement. His presence at the bodega placed him exactly where Etan vanished. Justice, delayed, is still justice. This trial is not just a legal proceeding. It is a collision between memory and evidence. Between justice and uncertainty. Between a family's mourning and a nation's unanswered story. Lost in the legal labyrinth is the quiet truth that this story is not about courtrooms or confessions. It's about a boy. A child who should have grown up, laughed, fought with siblings, gone to school, fallen in love, built a life. And never got that chance. The tragedy of his disappearance shaped policies, changed how parents watched over their children, and ignited nationwide awareness about child protection. His name echoes in every poster of a missing child. In every parent's nervous glance at a playground. In every law meant to keep children safe. He is the beating heart of this story. And perhaps that is why the prosecutors press forward. Because to let the case fade again would feel like letting Etan fade too. Hernandez's story is a complicated one. Born and raised in New Jersey. Quiet. Withdrawn. Described as gentle by some, fragile by others. Diagnosed with a personality disorder that affects his perception of reality. A history of hallucinations. A man who struggled with cognitive function and pliability under pressure. His confession might be truth. His confession might be fantasy. His confession might be the tragic intersection of guilt, delusion, and a high-stakes interrogation. This is what the third trial must uncover. The law demands not just an answer but a correct answer. The truth must belong to the state, not to the fear, not to the media, not to history's momentum. But after nearly 5 decades, truth is a slippery thing. Memory dissolves. Evidence erodes. Witnesses disappear into the tides of time. And so the trial becomes less about what happened that day in 1979, and more about what can still be proven. For the Patz family, time has done nothing to dull the pain. They lost a son at 6 years old. They lost the opportunity to say goodbye. They lost years of certainty, drifting instead in the murky waters of unresolved grief. For them, every trial is a reopening of the wound. Every appeal is another step backward. Every overturned conviction is another shattering of fragile closure. Yet they remain present. They remain determined. They remain parents who want the truth for the boy they loved beyond measure. True crime has evolved from nightly news segments to podcasts, documentaries, and social media analysis. Etan's case, one of the first major child abduction stories to capture national attention, still compels deep emotion. This third trial is already drawing intense public interest. People want justice. People want closure. People want to understand how a case so old can still be so alive. Some argue Hernandez is guilty and justice must proceed. Others argue he is mentally compromised and the case remains too thin for conviction. But across the spectrum, one shared sentiment prevails. Everyone wants the truth. The courtroom lights will rise again soon. The lawyers will take their places. The jury will be selected. The nation will revisit the questions it asked 46 years ago. Who was responsible for Etan's disappearance? What happened in that small slice of time between home and the bus stop? Why did a little boy vanish into thin air? And can justice be found so long after the fact? Pedro Hernandez will stand trial a third time. A rare, almost unprecedented event in American justice. His fate hangs in the balance. So does the legacy of one of the country's most heartbreaking cold cases. The story isn't over. Not for the courts. Not for Hernandez. Not for the Patz family. Not for a nation that never forgot the boy with the open smile. It remains a search for answers in the long, stretching shadow of a single vanished child. A story suspended between grief and truth. A mystery that refuses to fade. And so, nearly half a century later, the world still waits, hoping that one day the full truth of Etan Patz's last morning will finally be known.